Hello, good evening. Welcome to the welcome to the live stream. Welcome to the podium. First time at the we're very glad to have you. My name is Sarah van Dordrecht. I'm the director, and I'm very happy that we can continue our very long cooperation with Verein K. And Klaus Speidel will be our moderator tonight. You can ask questions later. I will come with the microphone. If you don't want to be recorded in the stream, just give us a sign so your voice won't be taped. The cafe will be open afterwards. I just wanted to tell you that we have several events in English going on. There's a cooperation with the PhD in Practice program, for example, and other events with Verein K, and also a German-speaking series on classicism and art that will start in November. Very glad to have you here. Have a nice evening and welcome Visiting Critics.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Klaus Speidel. I'm one of the co-founders of Verein K. With Jelena Karađerović and Dejan Karađerović. We've been organizing these Visiting Critics programs, and Jelena always has to help me for 5 years. 5 years now. We have one program for Visiting Critics, one for Visiting Curators, and we also do Crit Cross, a reading group for art criticism, which often takes place here, and where we also invite critics to talk about their practice. And this is always a very special moment of the year because we accompany 3-4 visiting critics through the Austrian art scene, we can really say, or mainly Viennese, but then also Graz for the Steirischer Herbst. So there's always, for the last few years, has always been a trip to Graz. And it's, of course, an opportunity to show the world a little bit what happens in Austria and in Vienna specifically, through studio visits, through institutional visits. We also meet theorists, but it's also very interesting for us to learn what the world experienced in Vienna, to say it very grandiloquent, and to hear a little bit about your experience. So to start, maybe you can each introduce yourselves. I think that's much more sound than if I read your bios off a paper, and then we have a conversation around art criticism, around the practice of art criticism, art writing, and also around the experience you had here and maybe how that compares to the local context where you come from. Yeah, so maybe we start with Rial.
Let's take this off. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Rial Christian. I'm a freelance writer, editor, art historian, and sometimes curator based in New York in the US. I am a contributing editor at Art Papers magazine, which is a publication based in Atlanta, Georgia. The publication focuses sort of specifically on the southern United States, but it's sort of expanded to talk about issues pertaining to the global south. And so I often write reviews, interviews, and essays for Art Papers. And my other writing has appeared in Bomb Magazine, Art in America, the Brooklyn Rail, and various other publications and catalogs. I'm just kind of speaking about my other work that I think is sort of related. I'm also the assistant director of editorial initiatives at an organization called the Viralis Center for Art and Politics. It's a nonprofit center based at the New School in New York. Much of our work focuses on our sort of centered around our fellowship program. We appoint 5 to 10 artist fellows every 2 years, and all of their work is sort of centered around a particular theme. And in my role, I develop and manage our publications that, again, come out of artist practices and currently focus on things ranging from ecology, its connection with colonization, to institutional and interpersonal protocols. Yeah, I think I'll just end with that for now.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah. Yeah, Eva, maybe you can take over.
Should I? Okay, so my name is Eva Borysiewicz, and I come from Poland, from Warsaw. I'm an art history graduate, and I co-run a magazine with four of my colleagues and friends, all women. We co-run a magazine called Block, and it's concentrated on the contemporary. Last year, I guess. Right now, I'm not really affiliated with any of the institutions. I work as a freelancer, and my recent freelance activities were a researcher for the Bergen Assembly. I was researching the sculptures made of coals made by the miners in the Silesia region in Poland, and I also worked on the internet adaptation, so to say, of the exhibition called Avantgardowe Muzeum, the Avant-Garde Museum, organized by Muzeum Sztuki in Łódź, and it's now available on the EFLAX platform. And yeah, I'm also an art critic, and apart from editing and contributing to Block magazine, I also published in other magazines, including Przekrój, which is a Polish cultural magazine, the Polish edition of Vogue magazine, and internationally for magazines like Art Agenda, Flash Art. There's an upcoming text for Text zur Kunst and Spike, and there were probably some other magazines that I contributed to, but I don't remember them now. And I don't have a particular interest. I guess I'm like figuring stuff out yet. I'm close to 40, so it's high time that I figure it out. But I still haven't done it yet. I'm fine. 40. Okay, that's good. That's good. Good to hear. Yeah.
Hello everyone, I'm David Mann. I live and work in Johannesburg, South Africa as a freelance writer, editor, and arts journalist. I edit an arts publication called Creative Film. And I suppose, to put it simply, I'm interested in writing alongside artistic practice as opposed to writing in direct response to it. As to how that always happens, I'm not too sure, but I enjoy figuring that out. And then the other main work I do is I work as the process writer for an interdisciplinary incubator space for the arts called the Center for the Less Good Idea. That's founded by the South African artist William Kentridge. Since 2016 or 2017, we've worked with probably more than 700 artists, I think. We produced 2 seasons of performing arts, well, interdisciplinary, but primarily performance, programs of performance a year. Each season has a theme or a central provocation that we all respond to. It's been text, it's been breath and mythology, and the one coming up in October now is on translation. And we sort of have workshops where we incubate that work, develop it, and have these sort of scratch performances. The idea is that the work is very much incomplete. It is in process constantly, takes on new life constantly elsewhere. And yeah, I work as the process writer for all of that, so primarily archiving the work that we do at the center, but also writing the kind of inception or the seed of an idea and tracing that through to its final iteration, whatever that may be. Yeah.
Thank you, David.
I'm Vladiya. I don't know if I'm more proper to participate in the visiting curator programs or in the visiting art critic program, because most of my practice is in curatorship. For years, long years, I was a curator at the branch of the Municipal Gallery of Sofia, which was very richful in my thinking, because then I had to combine permanent collection with contemporary young artists, and it was constant play of how they contextualize and work together in one space. And since 1 year, I moved into this new and become a chief curator for visual arts at the newly established cultural center in Sofia, which is an interdisciplinary place. It's basically the first of its kind after '89, built in Bulgaria, and it combines performance art with visual arts. So my main task this year is how to structure the program of this new institute, which is called Toplo Centrala, and it's basically the building. The core of the building is a former heating place for the National Palace of Culture. It's placed in one big park. And now for this 0 year, because we are not officially opened by the municipality, although we are a municipal cultural center, because there's still processes of furnishing and equipping technically the space, so that's why they didn't cut the wire. But even for this 0 year, we produced more than 100 events. So it's quite a busy place, and we become focus for the independent scene in Sofia. I write mostly for East European art. I have many texts which describes the development of the contemporary art scene in Bulgaria after '89 in reference to Eastern Europe. They're published in magazines and also in academic context, some of them. I also have texts about young artists in Bulgaria, like 3 or 4 years ago. I made this big retrospective exhibition because while I was working at the Municipal Gallery through our branch, we made solo shows of more than 100 artists. So this was an exhibition which presented kind of the artists which passed through this place. It was Meeting Point Place at Vaska Mihaylova Gallery. And I also write analytical text about, for example, the engaged art in Bulgaria or the lack of engaged art in Bulgaria. Mostly my texts are on the side of the artist, so mostly I write curatorial texts in which I try to analyze bigger contexts, so to say.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think we're already getting also a kind of vision of the breadth of what people who can be part of a Visiting Critics program do, from inception of projects, like in David's case, all the way through art criticism in the sense of coming to see a show you didn't curate and writing about it. And maybe I'd like to follow up on that as a first question. All of you were, I think, relatively consciously choosing words. So Eva called herself an art critic, whereas David avoided the word, I felt, like talking about being an art writer. I wrote it down, freelance writer, art journalist, and then saying that you write alongside art. I would like to hear a little bit more about the position you see yourself in relationship to art, or the multiple ones, because of course most of us do occasionally write catalog texts while also writing art criticism for magazines or for websites, and sometimes write the curatorial text if we do curate for the exhibitions we curated. But what are the aims, what are your zones of writing, and maybe also what is it you don't do or you don't want to do? Yeah. Riel, do you want to start? Yeah.
I won't grab the mic this time. Yeah, it's actually funny. I very, very intentionally do not call myself an art critic. And I actually recently wrote a piece about that. The etymology of the word critic comes from a word meaning to judge, and I don't feel that it's my place as a writer, as a person, to impose my opinions on someone else's work. People have a multiplicity of experiences, and for that reason, I also write alongside the artist. I often find it difficult to write negative reviews, not because I am happy with everything I see, but because writing is painful work, even if you do it for a living. And so for me, it comes from the desire to write, I think comes from a place of wanting to understand what it is I like about something, or what it is I want to critique about it, and to really put it into words. I find that in my work, I'm often, I tend to focus on themes of identity, connections between various diasporas, and themes of the body, how we relate to the spaces that we're in, that we occupy, or how we feel excluded from those spaces. And so a lot of my work focuses on institutions, institutional critique. So not only thinking about the way that, thinking about the work itself, but also the way that it's displayed, and how museums and galleries should often be self-critical, or hold themselves to a sort of critical accountability of the way that they represent and work with artists, either living or dead.
So you this evaluation, which you kind of rejected when it comes to people, you do apply it to institutions?
I do, yes.
Okay. So it's kind
without
of a shift.
abandon, yeah.
Yeah. Does someone want to follow up on that directly?
I could go. I guess to speak to my use of the word arts journalist of art critic, because my background is in journalism. It was what I studied at university, and then sort of married that with what I was doing throughout university, which was hanging out with the art students and hanging out at outside the theater, drinking too much coffee and smoking too many cigarettes, and that became the thing, and that became the spark. But I guess not to get too ponderous about it, but it maybe is also born out of a sense of duty. I mean, criticism in South Africa is in a state of crisis, to be honest. There's a handful of us dedicatedly and consistently writing about art. It's not for a lack of talent. It's a pretty unsustainable career choice. And sort of part of that is down to very corrupt systems, I think, corrupt systems of governance. I've kind of used this example a lot over the past couple of days, but during the pandemic, when there were sort of stimulus funds made available to artists, art practitioners, writers from the government, there was transparency about how much money was made available, and that just did not reach anyone. It was disappeared, it was embezzled, and I think that's the duty of journalism, right? Of arts journalism, is to kind of pursue those kinds of things, those kinds of troubles. Even then it's difficult. We need, if I'm being specific, we need investigative arts journalism, but the structures of support for that are also incredibly difficult, almost non-existent. Our newspapers are in crisis. It's difficult, in short. So yeah, I think that's the choice of word there for arts journalist, but I think I echo a lot of real sentiments about criticism as being interpreted as quite judgmental. or being quite judgmental. And I guess I see the role of arts writing as being part interlocution, not helping artists find the words, but just helping artists find new ways of explaining what it is they're wrestling with. I mean, art is about making sense of the world, and art writing kind of helps that sense-making process, I think, is my approach to it.
I can relate with this instability which you described. So I was thinking a lot what we need in order to have the art critic as an institution. So in Bulgaria, we are like in the recent years, we don't have magazines for art, we don't have, the rare websites are closed, so that you don't have really the website or the magazine to publish something. Maybe because of that, a lot of people started to experiment of like creating Facebook critic. We have such a kind of project, or to have other forms of discussion, but like the discussion in general is lacking. So being a curator in a situation where you don't have art critic institution or possibility to really work with this mirror which the art critic can provide. For me, it's like more interesting in the recent years, first, how to shape contexts, because the Bulgarian scene is not so well connected. Let's say parts of it, they are connected with the international context, but the other parts are completely local, very closed, so to say, as spheres of production of art. And because of that, shaping of context is something which is really substantial. It gives platform for the artists to raise their voices, which I believe is a critical activity, because it goes deep into what artists are doing and tries to facilitate this content and this sense to reach the bigger audience. On the other hand, quite this year, I started to experiment with, I'm very much fascinated by the idea of art mediation, because I believe that art needs to reach also more general public, and especially in the context which are fragile, like the Bulgarian context, you need to have people on your side. You don't have this art bubble or like big art community, but you need to have people on your side in order to justify your role in this society, also in front of politicians as well. So I started to experiment by inviting like people who are completely out of the art sphere to speak about exhibitions. Like, for example, physician to speak about video by the artist Ivan Mudov's on Stalker. It was quite an interesting experiment, to be honest, because they create a narrative which is completely different, and because it's not profound into art, so it reaches in order to translate what art means to this person with his language, so to say, it becomes kind of a more popular narrative, more popular story, which could be shared and which really could attract the attention of the general public. This, I believe, is also, I am planning to develop this through establishing art mediation program at Toplocentrala, because what I've learned from this newly developed context of art mediation is that you use any kind of knowledge trying to explain what you see. And basically it's very involving for the people who just enter the museum or just enter the gallery space. It's a way to reach them. And this, in both directions, more popular, and on the other hand, more analytical, more shaping context and giving platforms, which I did basically also with some projects which long-term projects for public space. You always need a platform, like to create a critical platform in order this project to be well perceived, well explained to reach the public. This is for me are two, let's say, opposite but interesting, at least for me, directions of critical activity within a fragile context where you actually don't have the basic pillars of the of the institution of art criticism.
Yeah, before I let Eva continue, but
so
maybe
about
just
about the art, I mean, naming myself an art critic. As far as I remember, I wrote in my bio, I'm an art writer, so it changes a bit. Maybe this relates to me writing my first negative review very recently. So maybe suddenly became an art. I don't know, advanced or like I don't know, fell to the art critic position. And also, Krytyka in Polish doesn't really have a. It's more of a neutral word, neutral word, so to say, and it's more connected to analysis. It's not like necessary, like writing not nice things about somebody's work. But I agree with Ria that writing is hard, and I don't really understand the purpose of doing hard work in order to criticize somebody. And the more art I see, the less I tend to believe that that there is something like bad art. There's only art I don't like or I don't understand, to be honest. This is how I feel about this right now, and you probably all know this. When it comes to writing, like about art or an exhibition, you probably all know this sensation when you understand something. That's like a real satisfaction to me when I grasp something. So this is so writing a review or an essay on an artist's work is a way to transfer this spark to the reader. Of course, I will not always succeed, but I do my best to try. And what did I write here? And also also for me, art is a very personal thing. So experiencing art and experiencing and going through exhibition is also, at least for me, as a critic or I don't know, an art writer, it's also a psychoanalytical work, so to say. So I tend to discover a lot of stuff about myself and expose my own biases, so to say. And I think this is also a nice thing to express in a text, because every one of us has a bias, or even several biases, in my case. So it's also an exercise in self-understanding, I would say.
Thank you so much for these different points of views, very deep, and I really appreciated also the two positions. On the one hand, to say, maybe what's needed in my context is the investigative part of art journalism. I'm wondering about that in Austria. I remember the very first Crit Cross we did, we read a text by Nina Schädelmeier criticizing the way the exhibition of the Horten collection happened in Leopold at the time. So that was for me a bit bordering, and it was of course in Profil and not in an art magazine. It's kind of bordering this investigative art journalism, but I'm not sure that we have a lot of people who do that, and maybe the necessity in the case you evoked is very obvious. In our case it may be less obvious, but I do think that there are things to be done in this direction. Matthias Dussini does it maybe sometimes a little bit, but also, Nina Schädelmeier. So to say, okay, before we even criticize the work, let's already, go one step before. And also your position to say, maybe we need a different context, because the art that would be the most interesting doesn't even have a lot of spaces to happen. Yeah. So I create spaces where critical art can happen, in both the sense of being maybe also critical of society, but also important. So that's very interesting. But because nobody made a case for art criticism as a writing activity, I thought I'd make it. I mean, there's this book by James Elkins, and one of the texts argues that basically art critics in the 19th century were on the side of the public, and then and they were basically evaluating art as if they were one of the general public. And then avant-garde happened, and art became so complex that now it had to be explained to the bourgeois. And then the art critics changed sides, and they moved to the side of the artist. And that made the general public skeptical of the art critic, because now the art critic became kind of the voice of the artist, and then people felt, oh, he's not on my side, or they are on the side of maybe marketing the art, and so on and so forth. And I don't quite know if that's true, because Diderot also told a lot in his texts already about his experience with artists and so on, but I find it kind of an interesting movement to ask yourself on what, to take it in terms of side, general public or art world. And it relates a bit to the question, who's the public, which I would like to make my next question, but there's one text by Noel Carroll, which is called On Criticism, where he says, well, the only thing that differentiates is criticism from all other writing about art is evaluation. Because basically the art historian analyzes, they contextualize, they make taxonomies and so on. The only thing they don't do is evaluate. And so he says, well, if we want to do art criticism as art criticism, evaluation is kind of the thing that makes us different. And he calls it evaluation grounded on reason, which can be positive. So it's evaluation which can be positive or negative. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative. But the reason why I do write negative criticism when I have to is because I think there's much more art that wants to be shown than spaces where art is shown. And the market is not going to act as a corrective. I don't know, the curators don't seem to act as a very strong corrective, because they often are kind of drawn by trends and sometimes market. So I think the only role who could potentially be a corrective and say, hey, give less space to this because this is not so interesting, is the art critic. And that's why I try to still play this role, not for young artists, like I wouldn't take apart a first show of a young artist, but people who already, from my perspective, have too many shows to still make good shows. I think I have the duty to speak up. At least that's my way of why I still write negative evaluations. And I know that that's not so a lot of people feel uncomfortable with that, and sometimes we speak about it also with colleagues. But that's why I kind of think it also has a role to play. But yeah, I would like to come to the next question, which is, you spoke a little bit about the question of the public and who do you want to reach, and you spoke also about this magazine where you collaborate, which talks about art, which is based in Georgia and looks at art in the South. And we had one Crit Cross, which was around the question of the American South and how to avoid that there's a kind of brain drain from art in the South to New York. And if you want to make it, you have to go to New York, and how to create a context and so on. I was wondering, in terms of audience, do you write for the expert audience? Do you write for the kind of art people, or do you consciously sometimes try to write for someone else, or is it a question that's not at all on your minds? Yeah, because to feed a bit more why I'm asking this question, it's really, for me, it has become an issue lately. I have felt more and more uncomfortable only writing for a bubble. I studied philosophy, I did a PhD in philosophy. I mean, I can write the kind of art text that quotes all the fancy people and that addresses other fancy people. But I'm not satisfied with doing that anymore, and so I kind of feel your question as well in that sense. But I'm wondering, I do also think that there is a place for this writing, for art writing for professionals. And to a certain degree, art can be a bit like quantum physics, where it's other quantum physicists that understand it. It's okay, being a very advanced activity, it maybe has to be elitist. So I'm not totally decided, but for myself, at least in some places, I try to do this other kind of writing, which will be more inclusive and so on. I was wondering if that's an issue and in what way.
No, go ahead. Yeah. No, I was thinking, taking this word evaluation, I was thinking how at the beginning of the 90s in Bulgaria there were even shows which were like presenting the best artists out of a big pool with artists which just appeared and became more visible. And then this evaluation process got into the very curatorial practices. So it was basically during 90s question of visibility or invisibility. If you are into a certain curatorial context, that you become more visible internationally, but then if you are out of it, you're invisible. So that's why the outcome for my generation on the Bulgarian scene in particular is very fragmented context. And now if I go back now, after you asking this question, thinking about Bulgarian context currently and its fragility, I believe that because the scene expanded a lot, we have many new places, different players and actors, and all of them are in kind of creation of platforms, just to establish some links. And there is no place for art critic, particularly at the moment, because at some point it was very, very twisted. First, it was twisted by the lifestyle magazines, which were the substitution for the art magazines, for the professional art magazines, and then it was twisted by this fragility of the context, because you don't have, same criteria. Like, for example, the criteria for a certain art critic will be valid within a certain part of the Bulgarian scene, and then within the other part you have different knowledge, different, background which you apply. So in this context, the art critique was twisted because it became justification of certain parts of this fragile context. So that's why, like 2 years ago, I wrote a text with a provocative title, "We don't need art critic anymore," which was kind of, for Bulgaria, it was like, come on, how we don't need it. But then we started to think why, what kind of art critic we actually need. And I believe that the next step will be, after new spaces create these platforms, what they're creating now. Like, for example, we have this place, Swimming Pool, run by a colleague of mine, a curator and also very good writer, art writer. And she now established a journal for, it is called Art and Social Critic. So it's not only art, it also combines a bit of architecture, a bit of some other disciplines. So it's not that you have this clear context. Basically, you have different critical platforms.
Thank you. I'd like to read that text, but it's in Bulgarian, right?
I have to see. There is at least one publication which is in Bulgarian and in English. And yeah, I also have text. I will give you publication.
I guess for me, whenever I'm asked this question about who my audience is, I sort of half-jokingly say my father. And I don't come from an art family in any way. My dad is a computer scientist, and yeah, I don't know what happened with me. I was planning on going to art school, and then that is the only thing we've ever fought about. And so I did not do that, and I studied art history and became a writer, which is much more lucrative. So yeah, I mean, in terms of thinking about my audience, I think I'm always very conscious not to use jargon in my writing. I don't think that anyone, at least I hope no one would read my writing and find it inaccessible. I don't think I'm only writing for fancy people, because I don't think fancy people would like my writing very much, because I'm usually talking about them. My favorite writers are people like Bell Hooks, James Baldwin, Joan Didion, who each of whom are write in a way that is poetic and complex, using very simple, plain language. And I think that that is something that a lot of writers and academics need to try harder at. It's very difficult to express a complex idea using simple language. Simple but still beautiful. Yeah, and I mean, I agree that there is a lot of kind of going back to this idea of negative criticism. There are many shows that, or many artists who, you know, should be told that they are taking up too much space, but why, I guess I don't really see, I don't feel the need to waste my time or the reader's time in giving them space in a publication when I could talk about another artist who actually deserves to be showcased. So.
There's one philosopher who said, if you can't say it clearly, you haven't quite understood it yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm fundamentally convinced of that idea.
Yeah. I agree with Ria on many points, and also with what you just said. I mean, if you can't explain it in, you know, simple words, you didn't get it, basically. I really enjoyed writing for the Polish Vogue, and similarly to Rial, I always imagine my mom reading this, and she's an economist, so her art interest is, you know, just a curiosity, so to say. But yeah, I kind of like, I mean, when I would write for Vogue, I would imagine my mom having her favorite cup of tea and just, you know, chilling and that's interesting. Okay. So and I know my mom and my dad were also very intimidated by contemporary art. I mean, they're like entrance into contemporary art was quite difficult, and I was the parent in this situation. So I would call them to Zachęta and tell them, like, don't be scared. I mean, like, if the text on the wall is incomprehensible to you, it's just badly written. It's nothing wrong with you, so to say. But I also like, I don't know, using words like sprezzatura or Gesamtkunstwerk or something like this. I guess it's also, I mean, it makes me feel young because I liked, you know, art history studies in Warsaw had their bad moments, but I also met very nice people there, and we still keep in touch, so maybe this is also like a coming back. For me, like, I don't know, psychologically, I also think that, you know, artists, or we as humans, like, we deal with very similar problems to the people who use their, like, you know, sprezzaturas and capriccios and stuff like this. And I also like introducing like pop culture quotes into my texts, like, I don't know, lyrics from songs, and I also think some TV series, like, for example, Succession has like super nice lines that you can include in your writing, and maybe the wording is not the tone, for example, the tone, so to say, of the text is not that important for me. What's more important is the flow of the text. So it's like engaging, and, you know, one sentence like anticipates the next one, and yeah, and then you have this I don't know, and the ending somehow connects it all, so to say. So this is what's more important to me than to, I don't know, quote people smarter than me, or like philosophers and stuff like this. What did I write here? Maybe, yeah, also regarding the audience, I think this is also not a responsibility, but I believe that the editors that I work, they know their audience best, and whenever I receive like commentaries to my text, it's also somehow like, say Eva, don't say œuvre, or something like this. I mean, people know that, you know, the proper word for that is work or a body of work and stuff like this, and I never received a comment from an editor saying make it more complicated.
Never?
Like, no.
But you're writing for Texte zur Kunst, no?
Yeah, I mean, today I just received like the notes, the comments, and I didn't see any remarks like that saying that, Eva, maybe this is a bit too basic, but yeah, please.
They don't say it that way, but it was my most heavy edit in terms of make it more complicated was when I wrote a text for Texte zur Kunst.
I don't know. Maybe it's
Yeah,
coming.
no, but
It's
it's
maybe you
sandwich
know.
or touch
That
or-
was
It's
my
amazing.
first text. So maybe they would like to like I don't know, invite me in a way, or be inviting and not intimidating. I don't know. Maybe they treated me in a different way than they did you.
Thank you. Did you want to?
I think my thoughts have largely been captured by everyone, but I guess just to add, I guess the one constant is that part of an audience is myself. I'm always writing for myself to help me make sense of myself, my place in the world, and the other people around me. And I think there's a hope or an attempt that those who read that writing can access similar feelings or read it in the same way. I don't write for the academy, for academic institutions. I fundamentally disagree with that kind of language. And yeah, like I said, largely captured by everyone
Thanks
else.
so much. I would slowly move to the second part where we talk a bit about your experience here and how that compares, but maybe there's some urgent questions concerning this first discussion of the role of criticism, writing, tone, voice, style.
Well, I had a question about the fancy people.
The fancy people are. What's your question?
Yeah, my question was like, what does that mean, like, about questioning the audience or what type of audience, and it was several times mentioned, the notion of fancy people, and I'm very critical towards fancy people personally. So who are the fancy people, and what are the projection and expectation one has of the notion of fancy people? Because maybe for me they are not very fancy, right? So that's...
I don't write for fancy
Yeah, so.
people. I can write for fancy people. So you've said it several times.
I can back you up afterwards.
Okay. Well, Klaus, you mentioned fancy people first, so
Did I
maybe-
bring it in?
Yes, you did.
Okay, so it's my fault. I'll take the blame. No, I think for me it was shorthand for the people who know what neo-colonial extractivist legal structures are, which is 1% of the Austrian population. So shortly said, it's kind of academically trained people who are trained in the art jargon, and who like to use this jargon and who understand this jargon. So there are many ways of being fancy, but in kind of this context, that was kind of that was the image I had in mind. And there's of course a certain form of writing that goes with that, and there's certain institutions which we could name, but we don't have to name, that kind of do this writing. And then there are others where you always know where the artists were born and who his friends were at that time, but it doesn't tell you much either. And then there's maybe some people who try to connect art not just to other art and not to theory, but to life. And as bland and simple as that seems, I think it's something that already goes a far way if we think about art as talking about life and experience, and whether our own experience or someone else's experience, rather than connecting it only to other art or to theory. And I think as art historians and art theorists, we have a reflex of first connecting it to other art, because that's what we learned and that's where our expertise lies. But I think we have to, if we want to include more people, then unfortunately, and some of us, we have at least discussed that at one point, if we want to include more people in our space, we have to find a different way of speaking and also writing about what we do, I suppose. It can be one way in, at least. Yeah, good. So that was kind of my longer answer. Do you want to follow up?
No, I was just critic about the
Yeah.
use of certain notions.
Yeah, of
We
course.
have to be aware of
Yeah,
as
right.
well.
Yeah, no.
When you think
size, of course. Yeah. No. No. Thanks for asking for clarification on that. Yeah, maybe a little bit. Let's dive into your Vienna visit. And Graz visit? Thank you. Vienna and Graz visit. What are things that struck you? Maybe also did you have like personal highlights or things that you found surprising or noteworthy during your visit? Themes that came up, whatever stuck out for you as being noteworthy. Maybe you want to start?
Which microphone to use? For me, I mean, we had very intense program. We were visiting lots of galleries here and also artist studios, and we went to see the big show in Graz and also the parallel program. And I have I have my own choices, so I like some of the exhibitions more than the others, but as well as some of the artists more than the other. But like what was topics for me to consider, and they go through one show, but they also go somehow, I see in the air, is this topic of the war, which is like the main topic of the exhibition in Graz. Also very for me was very interesting the way this was presented. I mean, the name of the show is placing the border somewhere far, but actually the show presents how close it is. And not only close, like geographically close to us, but also how the border is within our society. And this is something which I've been thinking a lot, like generally. I mean, part of the exhibition was from reflecting the past of this of Steirischer Herbst, and also the relation of certain figures and artists with fascist ideas. And they were jumping from history to the present, to opposition, from the opposite side, an opposition to affirmation of such an ideas. And if we think of our societies, both Austrian and Bulgarian and all the societies in Europe, we have this border closed within the society. It's a border between value systems of groups of people. This is something which I consider a lot, and I will think a lot and go through again through the biography of the artists I saw there. And I think that it's a big effort that what the organizers and Ekaterina Lego did there to show the ambivalence of this word border, and to show the ambivalence of this war, not only in the present context with the actual historical events, which I think are bigger than whatever we can grasp in an exhibition or whatever we can express in exhibition currently, but also it was artists from questioning and artworks questioning or showing many different local conflicts, which kind of were not so much in the, I don't know, the prime time of the media, or were not so important and stressful for ourselves, but were very stressful for the people who were involved in them. And also another thing, of course, I mean, a lot of the exhibitions here involve also Ukrainian artists. There are many initiatives for even helping to the Ukrainian context, which is very strong sentence, and it's very, how to say, human thing to do right now. And the other line, which for me was interesting going through different shows, is this, the kind of new, at least for me, new idea of fluidity, of transformation of things. And you can see, for example, I saw it in the, now when I was thinking, what are my highlights? I saw it in this Katrina Daschner exhibition, and I also saw it somehow in this collective individual exhibition at MUMO, and also saw it in many, even on our one of our last visits to the studio of Nikolaus Gansterer. So it's kind of fluidity which is not just process, but a continuous, ongoing transformation of things. And this is very interesting for me. Starting from the institutional context, which, for example, now we see in Documenta, and this show in MUMO kind of happens in the same time when the art community considers what happened actually in Documenta and how it changed the institution of this art context. And then to the very personal experience, how you go into another language, how you collaborate, how you share your experience, how you let yourself go within a certain artistic process. This is something which is very interesting for me, because it has a lot of potential to form different things out of it, without fixing it, without organizing it in structures like the modernity did. But it's not postmodernity, you know, it's not like playing with different models which are more or less clear. It's just this flow of things where you don't have fixed endings, fixed form, as a declaration. This is something which I find very interesting. And I saw it in many of the exhibitions here, in one way or another.
Thank you. Yeah, super interesting, these two themes. Other observations? Yeah, David.
Sure, I can go. I guess, I mean, I'm speaking sweepingly, as one does when after spending a very intense and fascinating 10 days in exhibitions and artist studios. But I guess, yeah, general thoughts at the moment. In listening to artists talk through their work, and also, you know, reading exhibition statements, press releases, there's a sort of immediate foregrounding of theory, of, you know, and that's fine. Theory's fine. It's what puzzles me is that kind of upfrontness of it, that foregrounding of that. It feels like this sort of pursuit of certainty, which to me reads as this kind of rigidity in the work. I think what I was missing is a sense of play, a kind of attempt at the pursuit of uncertainty, of the incidental, working with the body, you know, the kind of tacit knowledge, the intelligence of the hands, all of those things that I think artists do. It's not that these things aren't happening, but that doesn't seem to be the point of entry into the work. But I guess, as I mentioned, I am fascinated by the inception of work and process, and I guess the way I've heard work being explained, that point of entry, I think is, yeah, it's puzzling at the moment. Another thing is there's a sort of prevailing sense of safety in the work being made, in a kind of insular way of working. There's a tendency to stick within one's silo of work. And I guess a question that emerged there was, what do artists fear? You know, what's the risk? Where's the risk? What are artists scared of? If anything at all. I mean, this is my understanding of why this insularity and all this kind of safe way of working is happening. I think the work that made the most sense to me was artists or artworks that really did embrace a kind of sense of collaboration. Art that really work to look outside of itself and question itself. And I mean, that doesn't have to be a very serious act. It can be completely playful. It can just be this sort of act of questioning. What am I doing? What am I doing wrong? Who is this for? What else? I guess fundamentally, yeah. How is this helping me make sense of the world? I did see a number of work like that and works like that, and for me, this is the most exciting, I think.
Could you give an example of an exhibition?
I mean, the obvious one is the collaborations one at Momok at the moment. I'm returning to that a number of times. I really enjoyed it. It's dense in the best way. I guess, who did I write down?
Katrina Dasher's show at Kunsthalle as well, even though it's a solo exhibition, her practice revolves entirely around collaboration. And I feel like that was a really powerful theme in the way that she speaks about her work, but also frames her collaborators as an essential part of her process and her practice.
Yeah.
In terms of what the artists fear, maybe the one issue may be the exercise of the critics, for international critics visiting. So I'm not sure that like a lot of artists would like show their zones of insecurity in that setting. So it's a question mark, at least. It might be that that's why you missed that, but it's a performance, and I think if you're an artist, you want to speak probably about the things where you feel safe within this setting, which is kind of intimidating, I suppose. So that might be one reason why you haven't seen that, which could mean that it doesn't exist, but it could also be that it was just the nature of the exercise that kind of brought people to more share where they felt safe and sure, rather than, and maybe the ones you saw did play it a bit differently, but
And I think it was also reflected in the work itself, was what David was saying, that sense of safety.
Maybe I misunderstood you. That what should artists fear? The exhibition which we show right now, Ender taught for 30 years. He was in constant danger. And this is, you saw the show, and this is why he invented 3 terms to protect himself and to make good art and to be curious at the same time. But to protect himself.
Right. Yeah.
Did I understand you correctly?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. But yeah, also some quick names. Klaus, who you were talking about, I think also works brilliantly with collaboration and just a methodology of complete sort of uncertainty in the best way possible. Finding new ways of working and how to approach the act of painting physically as a dancer, how to write visually, very simple questions that yield very productive, exciting results, I think. I love that way of working. Liesel Raff, I don't have concrete thoughts at the moment still, but there was something about Liesel's way of working with care that I really loved. It was outward looking and it kind of, it felt like the work was constantly asking itself, who's engaging with this? Who is this reaching? What is it doing for the people engaging with it? And there was an invitation to engage with that work. Practically, physically, which was lovely.
I kind of know when you bring up these examples, I understand what you were saying real about it being visible in the work. So it's not just what do you show as part of your work, but how definite is the work you show, right? How much do you show of your process of questioning within the final work and all these questions? Is it like chuck, very clear cut and clean. And is that kind of the idea?
Sort of, that's part of it, but also I think the type of work that you make, the concepts behind it can be very indicative of your place in society and a sense of safety or danger that you feel in your work, in your life.
Can you develop that a bit?
Well, I think I'll answer your original question. I think it'll
great.
sort of indirectly
Perfect.
answer that question. Similar to David, I was really drawn to the exhibitions that centered collaboration, the collaboration show at MUMOC and Katrina's show. And one of the best shows I saw, or the show that I liked the most, was Water Being Washed Away at Galerie Oberwinter, which was part of Curated By. And what I liked about that show was that in seeing it, I really felt like there was a sense of community within the work. I don't know if that's true. I don't know what the relationship between the artists was, but I think that that's a really strong, that's a sign of a really strong curator, being able to draw those connections spatially in the conversations that are happening between the works. And I think that in visiting the artist studios, something I would have liked to ask, and something that maybe would have come out if I, with a more prolonged stay in Austria, would be what communities do they belong to? And I use community as opposed to bubble. I think they have different connotations. In New York, which may seem like the center or a center of the art world at times, artists are really not supported in their work. There's no state funding, city funding. You do residencies, you get a studio for free for 3 months, maybe a year. You work odd jobs, part-time, full-time, in order just to make your work. And so in a lot of ways, the stakes are significantly higher. I mean, there are artists coming from wealthy backgrounds who make work because it's cute and that's just what they do. But for many people, or at least for the artists I surround myself with, that's not the case. So I guess a question I would have would be, so in New York, I think oftentimes, and this goes back to the question of audience, we're making work for a particular community or communities that we belong to, not as a way of sort of recycling the same ideas, but it's a way of putting ourselves into relation and showing reciprocity for sort of similar experiences and ideations and ways of being in the world that not everyone can understand. I don't know if that answered your questions.
Well, yeah, you were speaking about that you thought that somehow the work can also show in what context it was created and how safe the context is.
Yeah. If you, I suppose in seeing some of the works here, which many of which have are really focused on materials in a way that I think is really interesting and provocative, but I do wonder at what point does a focus on formalism translate into complacency for your particular position in society. When you're not speaking to a particular community, when you don't have a community because you exist in a bubble of privilege, either because of your race or your class, I do think that that translates into the work, or your maybe stealing from or looking at other cultures as a way of kind of surrogating that that strife, that difficulty, that oppression.
Okay. Thank you.
I can say a couple of sentences. I mean, I come from Warsaw, and it's a very different city to Vienna, and I find the architecture here really intimidating. I mean, I don't know how you people do this. Like this very, I don't know, I mean, it's very heavy, very imperial. I mean, the shadow that it casts is really enormous. And yeah, I mean, the people I met in Vienna or in Austria in general are really friendly, and that they do not seem affected by this shadow, so to say. I noticed that a lot of things is handed to you on aluminium trays for some reason. This is a thing that I find strange, and I was wondering about the color orange in Vienna, because I mean, I heard about the red Vienna, and I'm wondering whether the recurring orange color in public transportations and in many unexpected places is somehow a transition from red to orange to what, I don't know. We'll probably see. There's an enormous, I mean, I've never been to a place where this amount of state support, like money, is directed into arts. I mean, I mean, I cannot even compare it to Warsaw, to be honest. I mean, this is really admirable, I would say. And yeah, all in all, I like Vienna very much, and I don't know if that's the proper moment for that, but maybe on behalf of all of us, I would like to thank Klaus, Jelena, and Dejan for organizing this trip. I mean, they do an amazing work, I guess. I'm sure of it. We don't have an equivalent of such a program in Warsaw, and I really wish we had. I mean, I really wish somebody from abroad would come to Warsaw and tell me about what I think is transparent in my country, so to say. And we're in a position to say stuff like this, I guess. Also, this said, I mean, thanks to Verein K, we managed to see like the many facets of the Viennese and Austrian life. We've seen a regional festival, so to say. I mean, the Steirischer Herbst. I mean, regional, international, but happening in outside of the capital. We visited artist studios, met theorists, and hung around with curators from like large and wealthy institutions, and the only thing I somehow noticed is this. I mean, again, this is my background coming from Eastern Europe, where art has to be somehow. It has to have a reason. Otherwise, it doesn't really exist. Art has to justify itself constantly. So I feel there's less space for contemplation in Warsaw. Here is a bit more, but the consequence of that is a separation of art and life. And what I mean is that art is quite safe, so to say. It doesn't hurt you. It doesn't provoke you in a way. And I've never, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying it's just an observation without judgment. And of course, it doesn't apply to all the stuff, all the artists, because I have like 2 pages of stuff that I liked. I mean, it doesn't really apply to everything we saw. It's just a very like general observation, and perhaps the most like crucial difference. Like when I can compare Vienna to Warsaw, like this is the crucial difference that I see, so to say. And I'm wondering sometimes, what are the reasons for that? Whether, yeah, I would probably behave in a similar way if I were in a situation like this. So again, like no judgment, but yeah, I like Vienna very much. I would like to come back.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Are there further questions or comments, needs for clarification, terms to be defined? While you're gathering your thoughts, what are the kind of justifications that you come up with for art in Warsaw or in Sofia? Because you also seem to agree.
I mean, a subversion of status quo, I would say. If it's not a political piece, you tend to ignore it. I mean, this is what I say. This is what I meant, I guess. Yeah.
Hello. I'm just wondering, I guess in reference to my understanding of your question about what your thoughts were in visiting the artists who were here and the institutions you went to, and not to generalize it, like you stated, you have so many pages of artist work that you liked. I've been here almost 3 years now, and so I'm still discovering different institutions and artists coming from the States, and so in learning the community that's here, I'm trying to figure out why certain things I react to either joyfully and playfully, why other things are not so much. And then I'm also looking at the different, I guess the safety nets that are embedded here, especially during the last 2 years of COVID, and just seeing how the Austrian government dealt with, the ease of testing, and then my ability to come here, of course, is applying for visas and then understanding the educational system here. I guess my question is, long story short, the funding that is derived here from the taxes that employers pay, that comes from the workers, that sets up these systems that enable people to have a better existence, maybe than, say, compared to New York, or anywhere else in the States, or Poland, South Africa, Bulgaria. Is that a variable you think in maybe this aspect of work that maybe feels safe to you?
I don't know. Funding gives an opportunity. Like, one of the reasons for the new blooming Bulgarian scene is because of the COVID money, and because of the COVID, the state expanded its funding for art in order to support the artists and in order to support the galleries and the institutions. And we were a group of, I don't know, during the first year, the 20th, a group of like 10, I would say, art managers and curators, among them 2 curators, but also art managers from all kind of fields. We were negotiating with the minister back then, the Minister of Culture, for establishing of new programs. And for the first time in Bulgaria, we have a grant program, a year grant for art organizations. For the first time in Bulgaria, we have something like a research grant for art, individual research grant for artists. And this actually contributed really a lot. So now we have blooming of the scene because COVID was the best time for the artists in Bulgaria, actually, because all of these benefits and all of this public money. And I hope, I mean, this is a process. I can't say what will be the choice of the Bulgarian state to sustain this line, so to say, because we have seasoned governments now. With our last government was government for 6 months. Now we are facing elections, and probably we'll face another elections in the spring. Who knows? But the realization that state money provides better publicity for art, better access to the field of art. This is something which is very present now in Sofia, and this should be justified, voiced out really loud in order for them to convince themselves that they need to invest in art. because otherwise you have this, United States is not the example, but like in the fragile ex-socialist, post-socialist states, you have a very, very basic situation. I mean, really scenes which are disconnected from the international exchange, and VIP groups which can afford to participate, and very familiar relationships within art world, but not real public access and not real public space. And I believe that one of the things which at least we're facing now is how to define, to somehow to create for ourselves this publicity in Bulgaria. The opening of this public space, which actually the COVID money did.
Yeah, so any thoughts? Of course, it's only hypotheses. So you're saying actually the fact that there's public funding doesn't need to lead to less daring art, but your question was, is that kind of a consequence of a more stable context that the art you get to see plays it safer? And right? Did I interpret it right?
I mean, depending on the length of time that a city or country has funding for such things, does that over time influence people in what they experience, how they experience things, and then therefore how they express things? I don't know, I'm just curious as someone trying to figure it out too.
I think I'm also curious. I had the same question, so I can't provide an answer, unfortunately. But I guess to speak about the South African art scene for a little bit, it's art in South Africa always feels quite urgent. We're a very young art scene, and we are constantly grappling with a very recent history of division. Our history is always sort of right in front of us. And for that reason, if you have this sort of, mantle of being an artist, I think there's a compulsion or kind of, like I say, a sense of urgency to really do important work with this title, to produce an art of healing or an art of making sense of fractured kind of socio-political, economic divisions that are deeply embedded in the country. And perhaps here, what's lacking is a sense of urgency. That's just these are my thoughts now. Maybe there's no urgency to make art that confronts, that attempts to heal, that leaves safety behind to pursue something else.
Thank you.
I was also asking myself this question, and I don't know an answer. I know that we never did it wrong, did it right in Poland. Like before the right-wing government, there was funding for the arts, but this was directed into I don't know, like Polish years somewhere, and that's not necessarily the best way. It was more like toward promoting Polish culture in the West or something like this. I know that I don't like to be hungry. I like money. I don't need much. And I think, in Poland we have this horrible saying that a hungry artist is a creative artist. And I fundamentally don't agree with that. I think it's super cruel, to be honest. And there is funding in the arts in Poland, but it has to be, since the government in Poland is a right-wing, ultra-Catholic, anti-abortion, pro-nationalistic crap government, you have to I don't know, either play it safe, or express those political views in the arts, so to say, then you will get the funding. So it's like, I don't know, a situation of financial censorship, right? So yeah, I mean, this said, I have never been in a situation where I had an abundance, so I don't know, like, what this would cause, like, for example, to my work personally. And I cannot imagine what it would do to somebody's work, like, as an artist, so to say. I guess the crucial thing is that to remember that there is a fraction of chance in the reason you received the money. It's not only you, so to say. There's a lot of factors that somehow cause this situation, and you have to remember, you know, why do you do what you do, I guess.
Yeah, I guess my response to that would be that, as I mentioned, on an individual level, there's a sort of scarcity model when it comes to support for artists. The artists who do get supported tend to fall into a kind of, they tend to be more marketable. They tend to have a kind of respectability politics to them, and so they're digestible for institutions. And I do wonder if the term institutional critique, what the connotation is of that in Austria, where there is public funding as opposed to the US or the New York specifically. It's difficult to talk about the US art scene because the country is gigantic. And so I'm talking about New York, which is a very concentrated part of the entire country. I'm from Missouri originally, which is in the very middle of the country, and is very different than New York. But also has its own kind of art scene that's a little bit smaller and not as visible, and where everyone sort of knows each other. I think that yeah, it's I think it's difficult for artists to be outspoken against the institutions that do provide for them. I think there are organizations who are doing it very well, and they are more concerned with urgent artist practices, and so there are artists who are supported. I also sort of feel, I mean, there's this question, is all art political? And I think in a lot of ways it is. I think not taking a position is still taking a position, so it is political. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
For me, it's very interesting that at least in these 2 hours of talks, nobody of you mentioned the role of the gallery for the artists, which is a very important role in terms also of first bringing the artists into international contexts, to institutions, to museums, and also to help them, to support them financially, of course. We take a lot of risk and take a lot of money in, for our artists, especially for the young ones. And it's very interesting for me that you did not mention it at all.
Because at least from my situation culture, we don't have so many galleries, you know, who can do and can work in this professional field. And yeah, we know about it. And now, for example, when I speak about this new funding, it's that this new funding in Bulgaria, because it doesn't distinguish art galleries from, let's say, artist-run spaces. Both art galleries, commercial galleries can apply, and art spaces can apply for public money. So a lot of new galleries are forming now in Sofia. Not a lot, but like more than before, for sure. Different size, different shape. Some of them are more into a certain topic, which get this state funding for their activity. And it's like a near grant. So imagine the private galleries in Sofia now can get a grant for rent, also for the salary of the staff, and for program. So really this is kind of in between situation. Now we have to, and this is because the market is, especially for contemporary art, is very small in Bulgaria. We have new collectors shaped, but the galleries, except maybe one or two, does not play, at least in our local context, that's this role that they have in more active art market. And it's a very interesting situation. I contemplated a lot, and we spoke about the shape of Curated By as an initiative, because this is something which is very interesting for me. So at least to say that I thought about about the galleries a lot. It just, in my context, we now are in a very interesting situation, how we should distinguish artisan spaces and then the galleries. Actually, there are only 2 Bulgarian galleries participating in international fairs, occasionally.
I mean, I would love to learn more. I mean, I would love to talk about it with you and the galleries present. Maybe the reason I did not mention it was that we saw the Viennese galleries in quite a particular situation. And my perception of the galleries was more, I mean the Curated By, so like more institutional shows than gallery shows, so to say. This might be the reason that I didn't mention galleries and their role in this art world structure in Vienna, but I will be super happy to learn more. I am well aware of that. I mean, I was organizing the Gallery Share Initiative in Warsaw for 2 or 3 years, and I did a lot of work. And I mean, some of my, I consider some of the galleries my friends, and I know what they are struggling with. I just don't know your struggles. I don't know you that well, so.
I wouldn't talk about struggles because every day for artists, for everybody, one has to work hard and to struggle. But we should not talk about struggles. Just do it. Work.
I guess speaking about the New York context, there are lots and lots of galleries, too many to count. But with that, again, going back to this scarcity model, there are a very small fraction of artists who are represented by galleries, and you have to, in most cases, you have to be represented by a gallery to show there, and by extension to show at international fairs. I have personally never worked in a gallery. I don't tend to pay attention to art markets very much. I've only worked in the nonprofit sector, so museums, art spaces that don't necessarily show art but work with artists. I guess my, and I wonder, I do wonder what the role of galleries are in Austria. I find that in New York, and Klaus, this is something you'll like, that they tend to force artists to into a particular style that is more marketable. That.
No. I think she thinks like in terms of, because I no, but finish and then.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. No, but I think there are many young artists who, I suppose in my context, I'm thinking specifically of young 20-something-year-old black artists who get snatched up by these galleries, and they're paraded through different exhibitions and fairs, and they become like the hot new ticket, and there's a kind of, it's almost like a balloon that can burst so easily because you create all of this work. There's very little room for exploration, for time, and to a point where you just don't have the mental capacity to really critique your own work, or to participate in things like Verein K and to work with critics and curators outside of your gallery network in order to continue expanding your practice, which I think ultimately is what artists want to do. They want to continue changing and thinking and responding to the world, but also their work. And yeah, so I see galleries, many galleries, not all galleries, there are different types of models in New York, but they are often prohibitive in terms of the ways in which artists can grow.
To clarify that, no, it was a discussion that came up when we were at Marianne Vlasiewicz studio, because she had a very identifiable style when she came out of art school, very comic-y, very, pop, yeah. And then she decided or evolved into very different styles. And she brought up the fact that there's still a lot of people who want this comic-y style that she's identified with, but that she doesn't want to make art that sells, but art that challenges her. And of course, there is a pressure, I would say, maybe we can discuss it, but I have a feeling that there is a pressure of the market for style. That finding your style is a myth, largely, that's perpetrated by the art world and art schools, that most people who find their style actually decide to focus on one thing because it gets good resonance, and that there's a reason why, say, Birgit Jürgensen, who is at least as interesting as Maria Lasnik, is much less visible internationally. And one of the reasons, in my opinion, is that she chose not to have an identifiable style, and that when you go through a Birgit Jürgensen retrospective, each room looks like it's from a different artist. And that's something I personally appreciate, when a solo show looks like a group show, when people reinvent themselves, when they're not tied down by identification. But I do know from personally having artist friends that some galleries refuse to show their new work because the collector base doesn't want to see that work when they've done, for instance, very naturalistic images of naked women collaged into something, not bad work, very tough drawing work, and they shift it to a more mind map kind of work. The collector base doesn't follow, the collector base isn't there, and so they don't show it anymore. So I do think that there is a connection between art market and style, and that, you know, when there's no collectors, then the gallery doesn't show it, and then you have a problem. But maybe not all galleries do that, but...
I'm sorry. Because collectors also grow with the artists, and collectors are interested in the development of
Some,
art.
yeah,
Yes.
certainly. Yeah, no,
They're collectors.
Yeah.
They're collectors galleries deal with or work with. We do not have collectors who say this is art and this is not art.
Yeah.
It's not about saying it's art and it's not art.
It's all too easy what you say about galleries right now. I'm sorry.
It's not about saying it's art, it's not art. It's like, that's my taste, and if this person produces
Taste
stuff...
has nothing to do with art.
I agree with you. You don't have to convince me, but
Good collectors never talk about taste.
all the better. I mean, all the better if you're able to have a collector base that follows your artists, and you're able to explain it in a way that makes them follow, even when the artist wants to change their way of doing things. But I do think that there is a general tendency. I mean, we didn't necessarily discuss the New York context, observes it in New York. I have observed it with friends. It's great if you are able to like not make that happen, but I think it is a tendency that exists, and that does happen to people I know, and so yeah.
I guess I don't know. I don't want
First of all, thanks for coming to Vienna. It's nice to have people from out of town in town. It's quite rare, actually, at times. A few things, I don't know where to start and where to end, so I'm going to be very quick. But I think these imperial facades are definitely casting very, very long shadows and are very, very oppressive and very, very, suffocating. It's, for me, for example, one of the reasons I moved further out, because I couldn't deal with it anymore. That has to do with privilege, of course. This privilege in Austria is hardly reflected or critiqued. I'm not sure if the Hungarians or the Czechs worked really freely, so happily for the empire. But anyway, that's a different discussion. About the gallery thing, I think it's hard to say. There's so many different galleries that you can't really sort of generalize that as much as you can everything else, artists. And I really don't want to justify or bring up that system in any kind of way. I'm sort of trapped in it myself, maybe, if you want. But I think that commodification ship has sailed already. So with now FIAC being bought by Basel, really quick discourse, right? So they have 4 fairs a year now. So you're either in or you're out. So if you're out of that scene, out of that commodification circuit, you have, in a sense, to be positive, a certain liberty to develop and find niche markets in which you can survive and show work that is not so easily commodifiable. Of course, we need to commodify because we all need money, also as artists. So that question of style, I think, is relevant, but that for me has to do with the Art Basel ship, and that has sailed for me. It's gone, and I'm happy about it. I'm so happy that I'm so happy to not be part of it. And it's weird, but I have no desire to be that in it as well. So I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up. That it's hard to say gallerist. Anyone can name themselves a gallerist. Everyone can be a homeopathic art person, I think. So there's no certain gallerists have other agendas. I mean, it's just it's just the way it is. So I think maybe we both are. Huh? Ich schwimme. Okay. Huh? Was heißt das?
English, please.
But wait, it's not a talk. Well, first of all, it's not a talk about gallerists, or galleries. I just wanted to bring that up, that it's a big field. Thank you for coming to Vienna anyway.
That you really cannot generalize it. So it is a point which I agree with.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I mean, from what I know, the tradition of private galleries in Vienna is way older than the one that I know best, which is Warsaw. Right now, the situation in Warsaw is that the main 3 contemporary art institutions have been taken over by right-wing, anti-women, fundamentalists, right? Like, not really qualified to run any kind of institution. So one thing that I noticed about the Warsaw Gallery art scene is that I don't know, 80% of the galleries that I know are not gallerists by training. They are art historians, curators, or just friends of artists who happen to establish a gallery. And this is what I actually love very much about my gallery friends and the shows that they are organizing. And some of the best shows in Warsaw were in private galleries. And right now, with what's happening in state institutions, like, the gallerists will have an even heavier burden to bear to, like, keep this contemporary art thing going in Warsaw, because the institutions are kaput, as you said.
That was actually one thing I really appreciated about the tour you gave us at Exile, and the way that you spoke about, I mean, you were very frank that not all of the works were for sale, and that that's not really something that you're pushing for. And I think that's, and again, when I was speaking about galleries, I was talking about the New York context, because it is the context I know. But I did also mention that I was not, that not all galleries fall into this model. I find that the galleries that are doing, that are really supporting creative, ambitious, urgent, interesting artistic practices tend to be artist-run. And I think artists support artists better than a lot of other people can, so.
So now that we've covered the artists, the institutions, and the gallery, thanks for bringing that up. If you don't have any more urgent questions, we can maybe take it to a glass of wine, or can follow up for those who are here after a little bit. So thanks again to everyone for coming. Thank you to you for coming and sharing your insights, your thoughts. It was very super rich for me tonight as well. I think I'll like to look back at the video as well in the future, which stays online. You won't. And thank you to Depot for being such a faithful friend of Verein K and hosting us again. And in December we will have our next Crit Cross here with a guest this time. So stay tuned, and if you're not on our mailing list, please do sign up. We will keep you posted. We send very few mails, but they always have relevant events behind them. Thank you.
And again, thank you. Thank you, Verein K, for taking care of us. And this is, again, very precious what you do. And we're really super, super, super thankful. Good luck with everything.
Thank you, Eva, for voicing this from all of us.
Yeah, I have to go to the toilet. I drank milk.